Hi, I'm Gwen Nolan. I am the owner of Mother Compost. We are a composting service located on the main line in Philadelphia, which, if you're not from Philly, is out in the western suburbs. Our mission is to help make composting super simple for people who may not have space or time to have a pile in their backyard, but also just to help people learn about composting and get composting. So we do a lot of education for people at home like yourselves who are interested in starting a pile, but perhaps a little concerned or apprehensive about what that means and what they're in for. So we're here to answer any questions or debunk any myths about composting. So hopefully you get some good information out of today. I am going to review all the questions in the chat at the end of the presentation. So feel free to pop them in there as they come into your head, and then we can review them together at the end to see if we all have, if we've answered the question or if it's still outstanding. And then Brooke has been kind enough to put the Mother Compost information in there too. If you'd like to follow us on Instagram or check out our website, feel free to do so. And without much more ado, I'm just going to get into why we think everyone should be composting. So I will go ahead and share my screen and our presentation here. I have two screens I'm actually going to share. So let me see what this looks like. And here we go. All right, so home composting for beginners. Now, if anyone here is an experienced composter, I do not want you to take umbrage with the term beginners. But composting is typically more stressful for people who are just learning how to do it. And even seasoned veterans will tell you that things can happen from year to year. You're going to deal with different climate conditions. Your diet could change. So we're all sort of beginners in the composting process as we get going. So don't be intimidated. I learn something new every single day. So what we're going to review today is what composting is, because sometimes even that can be confusing, why it matters, why it's important, why I'm so glad you're here today to learn about it, steps on how to get started, what to add to the pile, which is what we find is the most stressful part of the process for most composters, the curing phase, what that is, just why you should be aware of it, application. So what are you going to do with your compost once you have it? And then diagnosing issues. This is when we'll play doctor to anyone who has a pile in their backyard and there's something happening and you don't know what it is and you'd like some help. Because there's pretty much about 4 issues that everyone kind of deals with. So let me just get going. Okay, so one of the biggest things I think is confusing about composting is there's composting, which is 2 things actually. It's the process that we have defined that turns natural organic materials into compost. You can see the actual dictionary definition there, but it's also what we refer to as when we separate our nitrogen rich or our kitchen scraps from our trash into a separate, we call that composting. So composting is actually, there's 2 verbs associated with composting. Then there's compost, which is what comes out of the composting process, which again, you can read the definition there, but is a nutrient-rich soil amendment that goes back into your garden and back into your soil. So sometimes I think people are like, are you talking about fertilizer or are you talking about me getting a bin? What are we talking about? So this is our way of trying to clear up some of the confusion there. I love this fun fact because it helps put composting also in a frame of reference. We will hear like, oh, it's such a cool idea. And it is. We're super excited about our company and like lose our minds at least once a day. But composting has been around forever. There are like references to it in BC, on clay tablets. George Washington actually wrote a ton of information about the importance of composting and healthy soils. It actually created one of the first like earth tubs, which you can see at Mount Vernon. Thomas Jefferson wrote a lot about it. So composting is not a new concept. in any way, shape, or form. And it's more right now, now that we all don't live on farms, how do we compost when we live in, heavily populated, dense areas? How do we rescue the nutrients in our food and return them to the soil? And also, why is that important? So I'm going to get into that now, and I'm just going to, there we go. All right. So 5 composting requirements. I think I'm out of order here, but give me a second. Okay. I'll go back to the microorganisms because they are the champs, but they were supposed to be later in the presentation. So why should you compost? You can save money. If you pay for trash, you can absolutely reduce the amount you're spending on trash. Saves resources because the food scraps that we throw away, such as like a corn cob, as you can see in the picture here, there is nutritional value and nutrition in that waste. So we can add that back to our soil, extend the life of our landfills. So it's estimated somewhere residential waste is 40% compostable material. They say in 2018, which is the most recent information available for municipal solid waste, 22% of it alone was food scraps. So that was the largest single category that we sent to a landfill. And then we can reduce the environmental impact of these organic materials in landfills. So what a lot of people aren't, we don't really think about what happens in a landfill environment and how trash is designed to be processed. But landfills are not designed to process trash. They're just designed to store it. So landfills, they pile everything in and then they seal it with a layer of plastic and then put dirt on it. And that frequency depends, daily or every 2 or 3 days, which makes sense. They're trying to mitigate odors and they're trying to mitigate pest issues at the landfill site. But what that does is it removes oxygen from the environment. So a lot of people will say, well, if I send my banana peel into the landfill, it's still going to biodegrade. And that's actually not the case. Because it's deprived of the oxygen it needs in order to go through that process, it goes through something called anaerobic digestion. Where it doesn't have oxygen. So then it releases methane gas as it transforms, which is actually a very volatile greenhouse gas. It's 80 times more potent than carbon dioxide, although it doesn't live in the environment as long. And it's volatile. So it's something that they're working now to pump out of landfills and perhaps recover. But there's 2 things. First, our organic materials aren't meant to be disposed of this way. And 2, we have so much trash in the US and really everywhere that if we could reduce the amount by even a third that we're sending to landfills, that really helps landfills. And I don't know if it solves the issue, but it's certainly something we need to explore because right now our plan for our trash is to dig holes and bury it, which will not last forever. So we need to come up with alternative ways to get rid of the waste that we create. I think there's roughly 3,000 landfills in the US today. Less than 1,000 are active at this time. And I'm not saying that to create a scarce, there's not, landfills are closing. I actually don't know what the facts around that are, but my argument would be how many more big holes are we going to be able to dig to bury our trash? That doesn't feel like a good long-term solution. And incinerators have been shown to be very detrimental to the air quality and the populations who live near them. So composting is a great alternative to that. And it creates a usable product that can help restore the health of our soils. So we look down and we just see dirt, but actually there's so much going on under our feet. And the goal would be to take these food scraps that we have, return them to the soil, and help, healthy soil will create healthy plants, will then create healthy humans. So really helping to complete that cycle of food. I'm going to, sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit, but I want to show you this slide. So right now, when you buy something at a farmer's market, grocery store, you bring it home, it goes in the trash and goes in the landfill. And that's the process. When we add composting into the mix, and right now it's an empty bucket, but you can also do it at home. We're creating a circle, right? We're creating a cycle so that those nutrients aren't lost. It's not without its own challenges, but I really think it's important that we, focus on creating more circular systems, especially around the waste that we generate, which is very significant in this country. So just wanted to throw a little visual there. So we're going to backtrack a little bit. I will come back to microorganisms. As I said earlier, so here you can see some of those stats around, this is kind of what your trash is usually broken down into. And 167 million tons of garbage is just a ton of, that was punny, a ton of stuff that we're sending to landfills. So this is why I got into composting, was about redirecting this waste. There has to be something else, somewhere else for it to go. The other side of the equation is compost itself has been proven to do amazing things. Healthy soils themselves can do amazing things. They can prevent erosion. They suppress plant disease. Compost can sequester carbon. It serves as like a filter to filter out pollution. So it's really, really, really beneficial when a quality product is applied back to the land. So we can take these things that we are literally throwing away and turn them into something that can benefit your yard, your garden, and on a larger scale, our farms and our food systems. So super passionate about it, as you might have guessed, but that's, why. So as you go down on your composting adventure, which I hope will be mainly fun, there will be some time where it will be very annoying and it's hard to remember why you started. And I hope you remember that it's a worthwhile endeavor, and it really can help. And if you're growing food in your garden or a raised bed, you will absolutely see a difference in the yield, no doubt in my mind. So the one other thing I want to touch on, especially right now, because there's a proliferation of compostable products available. If you're composting in your backyard, they may not be compostable for you. So this is the difference between commercial and backyard. And some things will say compostable only in an industrial facility. They mean a commercial facility. They do not mean in your backyard. So unless it says good to compost in your backyard, I would steer clear of it. Also, even things that can break down in a backyard system, like a bio bag, which is a compostable bag, that one bag may break down, but if you use them over and over again, it can overwhelm your pile with just this one source material. So I would be very cautious about introducing any compostable ware to your backyard system. And also, if you're composting at home, but your neighbor's composting with like a service like Mother Compost, it's not the same at all in terms of what you can compost. So because we are taking the materials to an industrial permanent facility, can take dairy, foods with high fat content, baked goods, cooked vegetables and oil, all kinds of things that seeds, skins, anything that's, organic materials. We do not accept meat and manure at this time, but those things can go. Whereas you do not want to put we'll get into what you can put in your backyard pile, but you definitely don't want to put dairy or meat or anything with a high fat content in there. It's not going to break down, and it can attract like interest from other things. So just want to highlight that before we get into it, because I know that can be a point of confusion, especially when compostable products are everywhere right now. So it's really hard to understand what that means if you're composting at home. And then even in backyard composting, we would say there are different types of backyard composting as well. There's kind of the slow go pile, which you're kind of just adding the materials, you're putting brown materials on top. You know, you're not that concerned with getting finished compost out of the process. You're just looking to redirect waste, and, you know, if it comes, great. You just have to kind of keep an eye on that a little bit, just to make sure you're not smelling anything or nothing's, you know, looking strange in there, but it's not as labor intensive as batch processing. I will say it absolutely will not, don't put any weeds in there, because it will not kill off the seeds. So your compost will have weed seeds in it. So you wouldn't want to apply that back to your garden. The batch processing, which is kind of you're studiously adding nitrogen and carbon materials, you're turning, you're watering, you're doing all the things to keep the pile. You're probably achieving some high temperatures. At times, it could be for an hour or a day, depending, but you're seeing the heat and the quick breakdown of materials. So it's, I think, can be a little bit more exciting, but it does require some planning, especially like right now, brown materials. I mean, you can shred cardboard and newspaper, but if you didn't stockpile leads and things, you may be out of them. And again, it just needs a little bit more attention. Both will work though. That, you know, this is a natural process. You think an apple falls from a tree and biodegrades, and that's really what we are kind of trying to simulate in our systems. I see a raised hand. I don't know. I don't know how to do that. Yes, Amy S. Hello. All right. Amy, I see your hand. If you want to enter your question into the chat, I am going to answer all the questions and we're going to unmute at the end. But I will get to you, promise. I'm just not technically savvy enough to figure this out right now. All right. So I'm just going to go back really quickly to microorganisms. And I apologize for having to, oh, actually that's two. So the 5 composting requirements, these are the 5 things that make composting work. So microorganisms, which we will talk about at length in the next slide, but they're actually what turns your food scraps into compost. Volume, so you need enough material to generate heat. It shouldn't, if you're cooking at home, it shouldn't be a problem, but you do need kind of critical mass in order to get those temperatures to rise. Maintaining a temperature or achieving a temperature will help the process. Air, you need to turn your pile or introduce air into it. That's what the microorganisms thrive on. And moisture. So your pile should always have the consistency of like a wrung out sponge. It should always look a little wet. This is one of I think the things that most people, when they're not seeing materials break down, moisture is usually the culprit. So microorganisms, the champions of compost, love them so much, amazing. There are 3 different groups of microorganisms. You can read all of this, but it's actually this amazing, complicated process that happens without us doing anything. So it's important to note that it's not us doing it, it's these microorganisms. All we're trying to do is create the environment for them to thrive, and that is with higher temperatures, water, and air. So without further ado, we will just get right into, are you ready to compost? I'm assuming if you signed up to come here today that you are. And a great baseline, if you haven't started yet, is to figure out how much waste you are creating. So sort out organics for a week or 2 to get a baseline of how much material your household is creating. And this is the nitrogen rich material is typically what comes out of your kitchen, but this will just give you a sense of how much space, what kind of bin option you'll need. And there may be limitations depending on where you live, which I will go into. You can put them in your freezer if you're concerned with, smell or anything like that, even for a week, just to give you a sense of, okay, this is like kind of what I have. And that'll give you a sense of how much carbon or brown material you also need to counterbalance that. So that's a good homework assignment if you want to just start paying attention to how much organic waste you are, or you would be redirecting if you started your pile today. Step one, that's like a pre-step, but step one is determining where your pile should go. You definitely don't want it very close to your house, but I would say you want it somewhat close as well. It's best if partially shaded because, again, if you're trying to achieve that moisture content, the sun will just dry it right out. And it should be near a water source, especially if you're using a closed vessel. So the bin that you see here is what I mean by a closed vessel. It has a lid that goes on top of it, so it has to be watered, or I have to have the wherewithal to take the lid off if it's going to rain, which I don't always know. So a tumbler is the same, and a tumbler, you really can't even take the lid off, so you will have to water a tumbler. So just thinking about, okay, where would I want to put this on my property? Where is it close enough where if I have my kitchen scraps and I want to dump them in, it's convenient. If I have to carry a jug of water over, that type of stuff. If it's an open vessel system, you are going to get the benefit of rain, but I know Haverford Township does not allow it, and I'm not sure about Lower Merion, to be honest, but there are choose your bin. Here are the two common closed bin system or closed system candidates, tumbler or this bin here. The pro of this black bin that we're looking at is that, see this door right here with the dirt, you can kind of slide the finished product out of the bottom. It's not easy, I'll be honest, but it's possible. So that way you don't have to kind of move the entire pile when you want to get your finished material out. But aerating it can be tricky. So if you're trying to reach into the corners with a pitchfork, that can get a little labor intensive. And there are tools like an aerator that can help with that are not expensive at all. A tumbler is amazing for aeration. You're gonna just be able to spin it and get the aeration easily, and it's very good for batch processing, for that quick, like getting the mix right, aerate it, water it. But you do have to kind of stop adding fresh materials, and I would say you have to do it for at least a week or two, depending on the season, just so that it can break down. You can dump the compost out. I once heard it described as like a cake baking in the oven. You wouldn't keep adding ingredients to it while it was baking. You would just let it be for a little bit. So what ends up happening is you're going to end up needing 2 tumblers if you're pretty serious about the composting and redirecting. So that can space-wise get tricky. So that's kind of what I've seen with tumblers. They tend to procreate, and people end up with 2, but they are amazing, and they do make the chore of aerating a lot easier. Open systems, which are really cost effective. Pallet bins are they can be beautiful, and they're pretty easy to construct if you have the space. Again, some townships do not want you using an open system because of pest issues. And, that's something you'll have to kind of figure out. Chicken wire, it's a little bit better than mitigating pests, but not much, but it's obviously a lot easier to assemble if you're not handy, which I am not. So those are kind of the 4 most common compost piles that you see, other than some people just dig a hole in their backyard, and that's up to you too. I like to say there's no wrong way to compost. You can do it fast, you can do it slow, you can use a pre-bought closed system, you can use an open system. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. And none of them are wrong. It's just what works best for you and your space and your neighbors in certain circumstances. Okay, wrong way. Okay, step 3. So prepping materials for the pile and just getting the pile ready to accept it. So you do want to put a layer of soil and or compost on the bottom before you put in any of your nitrogen materials. If you have a closed system and you are concerned about pests, you can also do like a 1/4 inch chicken wire or netting on the bottom, which would not harm your compost at all, but can help just mitigate those pest issues. And again, in Haverford Township, that would actually be required. So again, so if you put your wire down, you're being super safe, then you put down finished soil or compost. Again, you want to keep brown materials available, especially in the seasons when they're not. I know every fall I'm like, oh gosh, I got totally enough leaves. And then I don't. And I wish I like stole the bags that were sitting out for the township. Water, again, it's going to be critical. It is critical to the process. And even with the weather we're having now, when it dumps rain and then it's super hot for an extended period of time, you actually are going to need to water the pile. It can stop or slow down composition. What tools do you need to do this? Not much, pitchfork, garden hose, watering can, a compost aerator, and a compost thermometer. Again, if you're really trying to do the batch processing, if you're kind of trying to track your progress, those 2 very inexpensive tools can be very helpful. Another optional tool for the end would be a screener. Typically, people don't screen their own home compost because even if it looks a little mulchy, you know exactly what's in it. Any finished compost that you get normally, from a store or from us is screened, just to make sure that anything that didn't get decomposed goes back into the pile. And sometimes you may want to do that when you first get started, because you may find certain things are not composting well in your pile, such as if you're using a certain type of tea bag, it may not go. Filters sometimes. So it can be a good way just to get the finished compost out and then put anything back to continue to break down. What should go in the pile? So green materials, you'll hear a lot about greens and browns. When people refer to green material, they're talking about nitrogen-rich material. So fruits, vegetables, lawn and flower clippings, coffee grounds, tea bags. With tea bags, I would say not all tea bags are the same. There are some that have plastic in them, which also you probably don't want to be drinking plastic either. So be careful about the tea bags, and also if they have staples in them, you'd want to take the staple out. Meat and seafood, while green materials for sure, you do not want to put in your backyard system. That will create odor and pest issues that you definitely don't want. The other thing I like to say about the nitrogen-rich materials is also, anything with a high fat content, you don't want to put. So like, brown bread that has butter in it or things like that, even bread in general, probably not good for your backyard. On the fruits, beware of citrus. Citrus is actually interesting. So there's lots of different opinions on citrus in the pile. It is a very acidic, citrus is just naturally acidic. So depending on what's going on in your pile, citrus could be fine or it could be not good. So that's where composting is sort of an experiment. It depends on how much citrus are we talking about. Are you eating like 16 clementines a day, or your kids are, and then you're trying to throw all those rinds into the compost? That may overwhelm a smaller system. Whereas, once in a while, an orange peel will probably be fine. It's not going to create an issue per se. It just may take a while to break down. Also, beware of weeds. I know we discussed this before, but it's very rare that a backyard system maintains a high temperature to burn off the seeds. So if there are weeds in your compost pile, there could be weed seeds in your finished compost that you don't get out. So you could essentially be seeding your beautiful garden with weeds, which you wouldn't want to do. So I would avoid weeds if possible and send them to industrial composting facilities that are available. And then brown material. So brown material is the carbon-rich material. Leaves are the best because they're super easy and they shred easily. Shredded paper and newspaper is great when they're not available. You can shred cardboard or cardboard egg cartons, sawdust, eggshells. I will say in the backyard, eggshells you'd almost want to grind because, again, you need high heats for those to break down. Corn stalks, you would need to chop up, but they would definitely work. Branches, straw, needles, fireplace ashes, technically brown material. You want to introduce them slowly. You do not want to just like clean out your fireplace and then dump the whole thing in. It's going to overwhelm your pile. So add them slowly over time. There's no harm in letting them sit. They're not going to do anything. So I would just kind of work them in slowly, if that makes sense. And then step 5, prepping materials to go from your kitchen to the pile. Large material, you're going to want to break up. So you see here, it's a broccoli stalk. So if you're not eating them or using them for vegetable stock and you just want to throw them straight into the pile, you should chop them up a little finer. It will help them break down faster. Same goes for any other materials like that. Corn on the cob, you can't really do anything with, but it is corn on the cob. You want to make sure it's covered completely by the brown material because flies love them. The carbon to nitrogen ratio, like slow going, not high heat composting, they usually say 2 to 3 parts brown to 1 part green. I would always, my advice would be, continue to add. You're not going to go wrong by having too much carbon versus nitrogen. It's when the nitrogen rich material takes over that you tend to get odors and like sliminess. So 2 to 3 parts carbon to 1 part green material, nitrogen rich material is going to be perfect. If you are getting heats and it's working, you can be closer to 1-to-1. So that's, you kind of, again, part of the experiment, part of the learning process of figuring out what works for you. I also like to say, everyone's pile is different. The food that you eat at home is different than the food I eat. Depending on where you are in the world, the climate is going to be different. The environmental conditions are going to be different. So you can take a grain of, everything I'm saying, hopefully you're getting nuggets that you can take with you, but you certainly have to figure out what works best for you and your situation. These are sort of just like guidelines. And then always cover the pile with a layer of brown materials. And that's part of the pest mitigation process. Step 6, turn baby turn. So that's that aeration, right? We want to add oxygen to the pile at regular intervals. So it's a lot easier to compost when it's warm than when it's cold, or at least to see things happening. So you want to turn it daily to keep adding oxygen to the pile. Again, that's if you're batch processing and you're trying to create the optimal environment. If you're not, and that's not your concern, obviously just maybe maximize on when the weather's warm. During colder months, because you don't want to dissipate the heat that the pile has achieved at its core, you're going to turn it a little less frequently, and then below freezing, just don't even bother. Good rule of thumb, turn after adding new materials, because you're probably not going to walk back out there to turn it. And just make that part of your process. And then again, the mix of nutrients will affect how long materials break down. I have found that, these big piles that we take our materials to, microorganisms love diversity. They love lots of different things, but we tend to eat the same things over and over again, which can be another challenge or at least my small humans tend to eat the same things over and over again. Thus, so does my household. So that can also be a challenge in the backyard composting. However, if you're eating seasonally and doing better in that area, you may also just have a natural lift to your compost pile that unfortunately I am challenged against. And then once out of the active phase, you can take it out of the container and like move it to another container or just like lay it on the ground. So the last phase is called curing. Curing, I'm going to next, but is really more important in the large scale commercial industrial process. This is when the final stage of the process, all the chemical reactions cease and the compost stabilizes. So more different beneficial organisms come back into the compost. So on a commercial operation, usually 3 to 6 months are allowed for this process. I know at Linville Orchards, minimum of 6 months. At home, again, unless you're keeping a record of your temperatures, you're almost going to be curing as soon as the temperature goes away, which can happen very quickly. So you may not have to wait that amount of time for your finished compost, but I like to talk about curing so that people understand what it is and why it's important. Because the goal is to make sure we have the highest quality possible product to go back into our soil and back into our gardens. The danger of applying too soon is it can be too strong for plants, and it can actually do harm instead of helping them. I tend to, I say it's like moonshine, or like wine first, like it needs time to age. I don't know if that analogy is true, but it feels true for me. So compost is finished. Now what? What am I doing with this stuff? What is this dirt? So best time to apply compost is spring planting. Obviously, give those new plants a boost right off the get-go. Mid-season, you can do a side dressing where you just kind of, even in the photo here, you can see it's just added around the base of the plant, and before fall frost. Typical applications would be 2 to 3 inches. But again, that's really up to you. All plants can benefit from it. It can be applied to your lawn, house plants, even your trees, and you can plant right into compost, although most people use some sort of topsoil compost blend, but you can. That's my raised beds are pretty much just compost. And the vegetables are doing great, especially my tomatoes. Compost tea is something we wanted to talk about briefly. It's just a lot of people are a little discouraged by how much compost they get out of the home composting process, because even though you're going to put a ton of food waste in there, it's contracting and breaking down, which is amazing. But at the end, you're not going to have as much finished product as perhaps you feel you should for your efforts. But compost tea is a great way to maximize that compost. So you can look up a lot of recipes online, but that way you can create a tea that it's great for lawns, fantastic. But you can also just spray it on your plants and your garden, and it's also a little less, the application's a little less dirt under the fingernails. But compost tea is an option if you have kind of a little bit of compost and you want to maximize, if you have a lot of places that you want to apply it, it's a great option. So just wanted to put that out there for anyone who's looking at their compost and not feeling like it's going to go a long way. And then, to close out with pile problems, these are the things that most people get concerned about, and really that turn people off from composting. So the pile stinks. That is normally because you have too much nitrogen and not enough brown materials, and it also just needs a spin. So we'd say add more brown materials and turn. I would not add water if you're having smell issues. Let the moisture from the nitrogen-rich materials mix in with the carbon before adding any more water. Pile isn't doing anything and materials are just sitting there. If you're just looking at like a layer of cardboard or newspaper that hasn't done anything in days, it probably needs water, especially if it's crunchy. So I'm going to say it again, should be like a wrung out sponge. It should always look kind of wet. Pile has a crazy amount of bugs. bugs are not, I mean, they obviously, worms and bugs are just part of things being outside. So don't be super concerned about bugs arriving. Worms, you want to see the worms. If you see tiny flies, like fruit flies or anything like that, just make sure you cover everything with brown materials. That really should keep the majority of the bugs at bay. And if you have a closed system, that will also help. And the corn on the cob thing is also, yeah, they also draw houseflies, so bury them. Meat, pet manure, those things, do not put in them in your compost. You're not going to have the heats to break those down. They are disease prone. They are also going to attract next level interest from any furry friends in the area, so stay well away from them. And then never getting finished product out of the pile. You feel like you've been doing this for a while and there's just no compost. Again, this is where a tumbler happens a lot. People kind of don't know when to stop to get the compost out, and you kind of have to just let it be for a little bit, and keep watering it and keep turning it, but stop adding new materials. And if you do have a tumbler and you're like, I'm not getting a second tumbler, that's crazy, totally fine. Just freeze your scraps while you're waiting, and then the second you're ready, you can empty out what you got in there and start fresh. And I think that's it. So home composting is an experiment. Again, I said it before, but what works for me is not necessarily going to be the best for you. Our food is different, where we live is a little different, our bin system is going to be different. So, take what you can, but also feel free to figure out what works for you. This is the compost lasagna idea, just layering like this, and then keep mixing it up and turning it. But yeah, you're kind of making compost lasagna, which hopefully you all feel awesome about. So with that, I'm gonna stop sharing and get into the chat and start answering questions. Super excited. All right, so hi, Amy. Okay. I'm just gonna, can I compost in the winter, from Andrea S. from Monica on Facebook Live. Thank you, Monica. Yes, you can compost in the winter. You're not going to see the same rate of breakdown if you're fighting against cold temperatures, but you absolutely can compost in the winter and can continue to redirect your food scraps. But it is a little trickier, and you may see your pile go dormant for periods of time. So just don't be alarmed by that. All right, what is compost? Never mind. Okay, that is a direct message. I will do it later. Jen from Escalade. I don't have garden or any outdoor space. Can I compost indoors? Yes, you can compost indoors. But not the traditional pile method that we just went through. There are two different types of indoor composting that are available. One is worm composting, which is awesome, and the finished product is amazing, incredibly nutrient rich. And there's a lot of information. It's fairly simple to do. You can't redirect quite as much information. You definitely don't. You can't add citrus and things with high acidity to those piles, but it is an option for composting, and the finished product is amazing. And then there's something called bokashi composting, which actually you can add high fat content materials to. It requires these bokashi flakes and goes through anaerobic digestion. So those are two options for home composting indoors. Or you can look for a service like Mother Compost in your area. There are a lot cropping up throughout the United States, so that's another option as well. And sometimes there are compost piles at community gardens that will accept scraps too, so different ways. Monica from Facebook Live, do you have to add fertilizer to compost piles? You do not. So compost itself is similar, behaves similarly to fertilizer, and compost pile is really what's creating the finished compost. So you don't have to add fertilizer if you don't want. Aaron from Facebook Live, can I use an old rubbish bin as a compost bin? Absolutely, and a lot of people do this. You would just want to drill holes in it to make sure that air can get through to the pile. And you may want to even cut the bottom, like instead of turning it upside down, cut the bottom and do like a mesh wire on the bottom, and then just drill holes throughout it, and then put the lid on the top. So that way you could also remove that section to get finished compost out. But with a little elbow grease, an old trash can will work just fine. Can whole foods be added, or does the food have to be shredded or cut small? This is from Pan from Facebook Live, and it's a great question. In your backyard, you really need to shred it or cut it small. I would highly advise against adding anything in its entirety. It's just going to take forever to break down if it ever does. So it may also then just be rotting in there and introducing mold and all kinds of things. So you really do want to cut it up or shred it to aid in the process, unless you're like a composting superstar. I would stay away from that. And then, all right, questions about what can be composted: watermelon, pasta, or coffee. All of those things are compostable. Coffee is amazing, and absolutely coffee and coffee filters can be composted. Watermelon, definitely. Pasta, yes, but I would steer clear of that in your backyard. And I definitely wouldn't add any cooked pastas or sauces or anything into the mix. Dry pasta may be okay, but I would probably like test it first before I started dumping old boxes in there. Commercial composting, pasta, absolutely, toss it right in. So I think I answered all the questions in the chat. I know we were going to unmute so that we could all say goodbye, but if anyone has any other questions that they'd love to just shout out, I am available.
Can you liquefy banana peels and use that?
Yeah, absolutely. That would work.
Mm-hmm. Do you have to wait a certain time, or you know, because it's liquid, you just put it into your compost? And
yeah, if you put it through like a food processor of some kind, just to chop it up a little bit, yeah, you could put that in. That should be fine.
Okay.
As long as you have some brown material to go with it, I think that'd be fine. Yeah, but just putting the peel in, I'm not sure that's gonna go.
Yeah. No, it takes forever. The peel takes forever.
Yeah, exactly.
That's where you liquefy.
Mm-hmm. And that's another great, there are tools. Like if you have a food processor, you could kind of just throw everything in there and chop it up and then dump that in your pile, if that's something that's available.
Hi, I live in Canada, so we have pretty harsh winters. So I'm just wondering if it's worth me, with the little summer that we get, to do composting. Would I ever get any compostable earth?
That's a tough question to answer, in the sense that you can get finished compost in as little as a month. It is absolutely possible. But I would say you'd have to be kind of diligently managing that process versus kind of just, if you've ever heard someone say, like, composting's so easy. Yes and no. So maybe it's worth giving it a try to seeing if it works for you, both from a labor perspective and also just to see what comes out of it. But yes, if you're only doing it a couple months a year because of where you live, you're not going to get as much finished opportunity you're going to be able to redirect less, and you're not going to have as much finished material at the end of the process. But it is still possible. It can, like the huge piles we have at the farm where we bring our materials, the materials are pretty much broken down within 3 weeks, which is amazing to me still. All right, anyone else? Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.